Hi everyone. Well, thanks for coming. A lot of familiar faces. Really appreciate your time. By way of introduction, my name is Katrina. I'm an investment principal at Hivemind Capital, a new crypto fund based out of New York. And today we're joined by 4 esteemed guests in the Web3 infrastructure space. They each are spearheading a different version or different flavor of the infrastructure, and we would love to bring them together to have a very lively debate of what the future holds for decentralized infrastructure, specifically computing and storage. So I'll definitely let them introduce themselves, but first I want to set the stage of why do we want to care about decentralized storage at this particular point. I'm sure in the last year, you all have been bombarded by just headlines talking about pretty much decentralizing everything. While they each have different levels of merit, if we really take a second to think about what decentralization means in the tech stack perspective. So broadly speaking, very simplistic. You have the dApps, you have the L1s and the chains, and you have the infrastructure, which comprise very broadly, again, of the computing side, the storage side, and nodes. But if the foundation on top of everything else that's run are centralized, isn't it quite paradoxical of what exactly we're building? And also, this is also an important point because it's a renaissance in Web3. We have new projects popping up every single day, and also with the impending Ethereum merge followed by a purge, Ethereum clients are no longer required to essentially retain more than 1 year of their historical data. Then where will those data go? So that's why now it's just a better time than ever to talk about the storage. What do we do with data? And with that, I would love to officially kick off today's discussion by first having each panelist introduce themselves and cover 3 questions. What's the pain point you're solving for? What's the solution? And who you're selling to? I guess I'll start with JV.
Thank you. Cool. Hey, nice to meet everyone. My name is Jonathan Victor, also go by JV. I work at Protocol Labs. I lead a lot of our business development with NFTs, gaming, but just generally about how do we evangelize IPFS and Filecoin to the broader world. Let's make sure I have my questions here. So IPFS and Filecoin, what are we trying to solve for? I think this is maybe a broader question of what is even Web3. I think people come at this with different definitions. I like to think of it much more about how do we build a more resilient web. And so if you think typically about how the web works, we use things like HTTP, which is location-based addressing, but that bakes in a bunch of assumptions. It bakes in an implicit assumption of trust of who is hosting the content, what content is supposed to be there. If that person goes away, the data disappears, or they tamper with it, it may not be the thing you think. And fundamentally, that is what IPFS is trying to solve, where you can sort of remove this trust assumption and move things more, as other folks have described it, as like a self-certifying protocol where the data itself is verifiable by the protocol. And what that does is that gives you as a user the ability to exit, where it doesn't matter whether the data comes off of one specific server, one specific storage network, one specific computer that you've paid for. Like, you now have this ability to have your applications be built with this modularity sort of baked in. And that means that the ability for those different layers that sit beneath where your data may be stored, for them to build up a moat, for them to be extractive, that is much more constrained. And so I'd argue that is the actual promise of Web3, which is the ability to exit. In order to do that, we need verifiability, which is what IPFS prioritizes. And then Filecoin aims to solve a very specific problem inside of that, which is how do we get specific guarantees around the persistence of data. On a decentralized network where you can't necessarily know what each individual node is doing, we use a variety of like both cryptography as well as economic incentives to basically get guarantees that allow you to say, we know for sure this data is alive somewhere, and we can do that. I think the vision for Filecoin is much broader, though. Storage is one component. We think of this as a part of a stack of how do you sort of turn all of the cloud into different protocols that you could run, whether that's storage, whether that's distribution, so like a CDN, whether that's verifiable compute, so doing things on top of that data, whether that's programming, so you can use the primitives inside of this network to be able to do more complex things and express more interesting features like perpetual storage. These are all sort of like subsets of things that you might build on top of these building blocks, but I think that's how we think about this problem with the broader, again, like overarching view that this isn't so much about like one specific company necessarily is evil. I think every company would think of themselves as not evil. It's more about how do you build in more choice for users, whether that be like individuals who want to run their own infrastructure or people who are working with specific companies but have the ability to exit. Yeah.
Amazing. Max?
Yeah, my name is Max Lee. I'm the founder and CEO of Computecoin network. So basically what we're building is like we want to be the next generation of a cloud service provider. In other words, we want to be the decentralized AWS or Google Cloud. So that means what? That means that we can provide computing power and storage power. Storage is only part of the solution. It's not all. Okay, because Amazon had to have like a 30, 50 services, right? Machine learning, data analysis, EC2, S3 for data storage, and we're gonna do the apple-to-apple thing, gonna replace each of the service they offer, but in a decentralized way. So we all know that this is the trend, this is the future. So our clients, we are targeting not only Web3 clients, developers and the users. We are also, provide this kind of service to Web2. Services as well, because so for Web2 developers and the clients, they do need decentralized solution as well. Now there could be insurance company, there could be car manufacturer, they're not an NFT company, they're not a socialify, GameFi company, but they still need decentralized solution for their current services basically. Because that's through the nature of a decentralization, they can leverage lots of advantages of this decentralized network, compute, storage, all the type of things for their clients, Web2 clients. So, yep.
Excellent. Sounds like you're an aggregator of the different infrastructure solution providers in Web3.
Exactly. We want to build an ecosystem. I can share more because, just like Amazon, right? So Amazon is like, okay, why Amazon has such big success, be so successful? Because it's already an ecosystem. If you are using EC2 for compute, definitely you're going to use S3 for storage. You cannot go to Google Drive or other providers for storage, right? So that's what we're building. We want to build an ecosystem. It's a one-stop solution.
We like that one-stop solutions. And a special shout out to Max and to the team at Computecoin for making this event happen. And the next, Storj.
Yeah, so I'm John Gleason. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Storj. What we do is decentralized cloud object storage. We provide object storage that is comparable to S3 from Amazon at about 80% cheaper with a much stronger focus on privacy and security. And so the problem we are solving is that many people are concerned about storing data in public cloud where their data can be mined, and also that data tends to be extremely expensive to store over time. And it eats into the margins of application builders, and it really pads the margins of 4 very large companies that are controlling 60 to 80% of the world's data. And so what we're able to do is help customers both in Web 2 and Web 3 store data, serve data quickly, and do so by enabling them to lop a zero off an Amazon bill. And so we're working with customers like Ankr and partners like Max, for example, to provide a storage layer to help accelerate growth. Problems we're solving mostly in the Web 2 space. It's around media and entertainment, so video storage and streaming, and storing data sets for machine learning and academic institutions with high performance compute clusters in Web 3. Of course, everybody with storage in Web 3 stores NFTs. And then we also tend to work a lot with blockchain infrastructure providers to help spin up blockchain nodes faster. So let me turn it over to you and talk about what you do.
Yeah, we love Storj. My name's Greg Gottman. I'm the Chief Marketing and Business Officer for Ankr. Ankr is a company that helps developers in the blockchain space and blockchain companies in the blockchain space make things easier for them. And so we offer developer tools and developer suites of tools to help them build things faster. And we offer infrastructure services to blockchain companies that you might know of, like Binance or BNB Chain, Polygon, Avalanche, Phantom. Work with about 17 of the top blockchain companies to help them run their blockchains faster and allow them easier access for developers to access them and for users to access them. So we kind of are the grease that makes the wheels of blockchain kind of turn. So at Ankr, we fundamentally just want to make a better Web3 experience for everybody. We do that by making a better developer experience, by providing fast and reliable infrastructure services that generally just make all of Web3 work better. And so we really focus on the compute layer. We work with partners on the storage layer, so happy to see some storage partners here. And we generally, the way we do it is we work with data centers around the world. Our biggest service that we provide is a global node solution called an RPC service, a technical term for the nodes are the blockchains that you see all around the world, and the more nodes there are, the more access to blockchain there is, and so the faster it runs. And so we run servers all around the world that we run ourselves on our own bare metal, which is the highest grade, enterprise grade solution you can offer. And we write our own profiles for those servers. So we come from a lot of experience at AWS, where some of our founders are from, and we've taken that know-how to rebuild what AWS would look like in Web3. And so that looks like Ankr, and we're here to tell you guys about us.
Great. Well, amazing intro. Great transition to my next point, because it seems like we have two schools of infrastructure company here. We have the computing side. We got the computing side and we got the storage side. So I'd love to know what's kind of the difference between the two and how the two actually work together. So I'll actually kick off with you two, since you seem to already work together.
Okay. Maybe I can start it. So most applications use, at the most primitive, network compute and storage to get going. So if you are an application developer and you are building, the fastest path today is to go to something like an Amazon or a DigitalOcean and build your application there, because it includes everything you need to get started. Now the problem with that is it really starts to concentrate and centralize all of the functions into one space. And even though the cost of the elements that make up these applications have dropped 80% over the last 5 years, the actual cloud storage prices and cloud compute prices have not. And so what we see is, if you want to go and disrupt Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, what you have to do is be able to sort of match, as Max was saying, right? Feature for feature, right? You have to give that same decentralized experience that makes it easy to build. And so bringing all of those pieces together is really important. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about sort of, the developer tools you're doing on the compute side for dApps.
Yeah, sure. So we offer a suite of developer tools that developers can plug into, APIs and SDKs, which are common in Web 2. We offer Web 3 versions of them to help people more easily build applications in DeFi and with NFTs. A lot of what we do also is giving, like I said before, faster access to blockchain data. So in Web 2, you have to run your own servers, you have to store your own data, you have to mix it up your own ways, send your own deployments. In Web 3, all that is stored on a blockchain somewhere. And so developers themselves can store that, but most often this blockchain is around the world and it's stored by someone like Ankr, who runs it on these nodes all over the place. And we constantly have to spin up new nodes all the time in different locations, depending on things go up or down or where traffic is. And so working with storage providers, we can take a snapshot really quick of the current state of the blockchain. And when we store that snapshot with a good storage provider like Storj or Filecoin, we can spin up those new nodes 90% faster because they're built in a decentralized way, which works better with how our architecture works. And so it's a brand new solution for Web 3 that wouldn't work the same in Web 2. And you kind of see these new innovations happening more so when these companies collaborate together than if we try to work with just Web 2 infrastructure providers.
Very cool. What about this side? You both mentioned sort of an ecosystem play. I know Filecoin is trying to do more than just storage, and you want to be the aggregator in the ecosystem side. Any comments there of what's the plan?
Well, yeah, for Computecoin, basically, one of the key goals we want to achieve is we want to provide exactly the same user experience as Amazon, basically. Because the current industry pain point is for the developers, right? They need to learn lots of things before they can deploy anything on Web3 infrastructure, right? So they have a big learning curve. And when they want to do that, for example, if they want to do storage, they have so many options. They need to shop around and see, this is a Filecoin, that is a Cross, that is a Chia, that is a Swarm, blah, 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 right? So so that's what we want to do. So we want to be the Expedia of, which integrate all the hotels, and we're the Expedia for to integrate all the compute and the storage power. And then to the users, we just provide exactly the same user experience as Amazon, and there's no learning curve. no matter for regular people, you and me, or the developers. All the APIs or developer tools is exactly the same. And then the compute and storage, they are strongly coupled. They cannot be separate, right? So it's an end-to-end solution, just like what I said, it's an ecosystem. You cannot do compute on this platform and then storage on another platform. So this is not friendly to the developers and the users. It's going to be a nightmare, basically. So this is our vision, and we're moving forward step by step to that goal. So.
Yeah, I guess when we think about compute and storage, so I guess if you sort of look at like what do people need in order to build applications, there's a number of services. So compute being like if you're going to do stuff with your data, like the data itself is like how do you make sure it's there? One is then how do you do something with it after? So they sort of go hand in hand. There's also sort of like a physics problem where like when you start talking about large scale data sets, you can't just move that over the wire, like just moving it over like the internet becomes difficult. And so when we start thinking about how do we actually make these systems viable, like we need to start thinking a little bit more also about how should the rest of this stack be built if we want to build viable competitors to like Amazon or whoever else. I think the way that we think about this is more from individual nodes can have different offerings. This is sort of where there's differentiation. We highly believe in markets, and so very driven on like nodes should be able to differentiate themselves based on what services they're offering. That's different revenue streams for them. But yeah, I mean, I think, I guess in the macro of in order to build like viable alternatives to the cloud, I think you need to have these different components exist. I think how these components exist, how they're sort of integrated together, there's certain questions that become much more at like the technical layer. How do you actually like practically implement these things where, yeah, if we're talking about like large scale data sets, it's just not easy to move. And so it makes sense to move like the compute layer down to where the data is. And so this is, I think, more where we think, which is like a lot more like infrastructure-y. In terms of like the interface and what do developers experience, yeah, we're super excited about the number of folks who are going to build tools on top to make that stuff easier to do. Again, we think a lot more, as in the name of our company, at like the protocol layer of like what are the primitives that we can offer, how do we do things that are like secure, verifiable, all of that good stuff. Yeah.
Very cool. So just to paint a holistic picture, because we have 4 providers and the audience can be confused of, oh, exactly, they all sound similar. So to me, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, I feel like Protocol App or Filecoin is the base layer where it comes to infrastructure. It's very modular, it's very composable, and for SDK. And you guys, Storj focused on the interoperability between Web2 and Web3 in one of your value proposition, as well as some of the other use cases, whereas you work with the decentralized computing provider Ankr to essentially work together. And then on top of that, we have Computecoin as the aggregator of these different types of provider as a one-stop shop. Would that be a fair assessment of how you guys work together?
Maybe
potentially?
to add a little complexity to it.
Okay, yeah, this is what we want.
Well, so IPFS and Filecoin are 2 separate protocols, but they are related. IPFS is just a protocol for storing and retrieving content based on a fingerprint of the content. People sometimes are confused why that is not just Filecoin itself, but part of our philosophy, as I mentioned, is the ability to exit. Like you as a user of IPFS should not have to use Filecoin, and in fact, a lot of people use IPFS and Storj together. And so like the way that we think about these systems is much more modular, where like the primitives that we really want, especially in Web3, is to say like, hey, if I'm building an application, I can use a content hash anywhere, and I don't have to care if it came off of a Storj node, if it came off of a Filecoin node, whoever. Like I can use the same canonical reference and have that be the thing in my application, and then free market, like what's the best tool for the job? I can switch between them, I can do whatever. So I think that's how I would maybe characterize some of that, because like the way things are architected, Filecoin today is much more for like cold storage. It gives you like very strong guarantees around what's happening to the network. Literally from the consensus mechanism, you're getting these zero knowledge proofs about the data being stored and how it's being stored, all this good stuff. That's a very different set of like design decisions and optimizations that we've taken versus sort of like an erasure coding thing, which like gives you like the ability to tune for performance if you want like that really fast retrieval. But you're now doing something where it's like a little bit more like distributed. You're working with a larger set of folks. You're sort of taking more of like a probabilistic approach, but they're like both very viable and they're best for like different types of use cases. But when you're using CIDs, it doesn't really matter to you, the developer, like how you're tuning between those things. Right. You're able to like swap.
Interesting. So now you mentioned an important concept. Oh, I'll get to you in a second.
Yeah, I was just going to pile on that if I could just.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Just briefly. Yeah, so it's a great point because we offer content addressing through an IPFS gateway. We offer access directly through our own protocol, and we offer an S3 compatible gateway, right? And so it's exactly matching what's the most useful way to interact with your data. And IPFS is great if you have publicly accessible data that you want to have verifiable proof for. That's one great approach. If you want more private data where it's more enterprise driven and you want to interact with it more traditional Web 2 use cases, great. You want to do that too. And so it's just matching the performance characteristics and the shape of that data to the best Web 3 use case. And overall, the more use cases we support, right, the better adoption we'll get in Web 3.
I think it actually is really unique to the Web3 industry that we try to be collaborative and everything is more modular. It's kind of how our companies are set up. And so because I believe we all have a token associated with our companies, right, that kind of drives a lot of what happens with us. It's not just pure revenue, it's usage. And so the goal is the most amount of users and something that adds the most value to the industry. And so we work together to figure that out. So it's not about creating a walled garden and keeping everyone just in your own ecosystem. It's about like creating things that are modular where you can work with other ecosystems too to create a solution that's infinitely better than one company can make on their own. And then with maximum usage and maximum awareness, people tend to enjoy our projects more, and maybe that helps our market caps go up, and then people are pretty happy with us. And at the end of the day, we have users and we have token holders too, and so we have multiple people we have to take care of. And so it's not just about the bottom line of revenue, it's about actually creating innovation and becoming a valuable member of the industry.
Very cool. JV, could you define for the audience here, because a lot of people think IPFS and Filecoin are pretty interchangeable. Could you just clarify, like, how are they different and how do they work together?
Yeah, so IPFS, as I mentioned, protocol for storing and retrieving content. Actually, IPFS itself is a stack of many protocols together, so add more complexity. But like IPFS is like an unincentivized protocol, which allows you to do the thing of store and retrieve based on a fingerprint of content. And Filecoin is basically, you could think of it sort of like a square. Square is to rectangle as Filecoin is to IPFS. So like Filecoin is an incentivized set of IPFS nodes. They use a lot of the same primitives. They're using libp2p under the hood. They're using IPLD under the hood. So a lot of the same sort of principles are being applied, but it has some additional constraints to it. So in the Filecoin network, miners who are storing data or adding capacity to the network, they're required to lock up collateral. They're required to run these zero-knowledge proofs to show both what is on, like, for the capacity that they have, proving that that capacity is still available to the network, or if they're storing data, that that data is still available. They're doing that on a certain cadence, so every 24 hours, the entire network's proved. And so like that gives you a different set of guarantees versus IPFS, where what IPFS is actually giving you is saying, hey, you can ask the internet for data. If we can find a pathway to that data, we'll bring it back to you. And we can do that through a peer-to-peer way. So like as you're hopping around these nodes, we can like recursively just search around. Filecoin is saying, how do we make sure someone on the internet has that data for you? So one is like IPFS is solving a one-to-n problem of if there's between one copy and n copies of data on the network, we can find it for you. Filecoin is solving the 0-to-1, which is how do we make sure someone has that data on the network?
Thanks for that. That for the longest time confused the hell out of me as I did my research, but thank you for clarifying. Cool. Take a step back from talking about all the technical terms. Let's speak English here, and as a retail consumer, like, why would I care about decentralized storage? Is it gonna be that much cheaper, that much faster, or UI that much better, which I don't think we will get there because just AWS spent 17 years perfecting their essentially UI integrations. So can we talk about how is decentralized storage and decentralized computing better than what people are using now? And taking account how much effort they need to use, how much effort they need to spend to migrate. Let's start with Max.
Okay. Yeah. Because we did lots of research on to understand the clients, right? So that's a very good question. So we already spent lots of time and energy to educate the clients, right? So why you want to do decentralized stuff, right? So I think there's lots of advantages due to the nature of a decentralization, but I think the top two, in my mind, my personal opinion, is the first is about the cost, for sure. And the second is the privacy, okay? Or you call it monetization or something like that. Because see, the first thing is like now everyone paid the bill to Amazon or Google Cloud, right? It's not only simply the cold data storage. Cold data storage is cheap. Okay, that's fine. But when you do video streaming or whatever other services, right? Your bill is increasing day by day. You may start with 50 cents per month, but maybe after a few months you saw it's $50, right? So that's how they work, right? And the second is, okay, but decentralization, we have a much better solution to save you the cost. And the second is the privacy. So this is the biggest issue in a centralized cloud provider, because they monetize your data. Not only, I don't want to say some names, but we all know that people monetize your data, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't get your money. So, and this is the principle and or philosophy of Web3 is like, okay, I'm the owner of my data, not these big companies, right? I want to monetize my data, but how can I achieve that? So, of course, decentralization. If you do centralized, never, no way to do that, right? So that's why we need decentralization in terms of a compute, in terms of a storage, and whatever. And you own everything you do with this network. And you can choose, you're the boss. You can choose you want to monetize it or not. So that's the two key advantages on the list, in my mind.
Yeah, so cheaper and more privacy, but then this is a good opportunity to debunk a myth, because a lot of people think if I shard my data, store at some random's computer, I lose my privacy. Can we respond to that?
Yeah, so this is a very good question. Actually, many people ask me the same question again and again, basically. So this is what I said. I spend time to educate people. So decentralization is not killing your privacy, and the security. It's enhanced them. It's enhanced your security and privacy. Why? Because think about that. What people are doing. I talk to many enterprise customers, right? Say, oh, my data is on Microsoft right now. I duplicate my data into 3 copies and it's on 3 data centers. I know who owns my data there, right? Okay, as long as you know who owns your data, the hackers know who owns your data, right? It's a very target. That's the target, right? The data center in New Jersey, for example, all right? So then you need your engineer team to build the cybersecurity solutions to fight with the hackers, right? So, but now think about that. If you do these things in a decentralization way, you have a big file, you chop it into thousands of small pieces, and on top of that, you do the encryption, and you distribute it to unknown guys in the world, like 1,000 nodes, each one hold your piece of your data, and this little piece is got encrypted, right? So even you have no idea who owns my data. Maybe 1,000 nodes in the world, but who they are, I don't know, let alone the hacker, right? So that's more secure. It's not less secure. So I think that's a good answer.
Yeah,
and
it really is a good answer.
Right?
Yeah.
But things like we achieve this by using technologies like, say, coding theory, information theory, right? So Fountain code, Reed-Solomon code, and lots of other. So it's solved by the cutting-edge technologies.
Yeah. I don't know what those are, but sounds cool. And JV's very itched to talk about encryption.
Well, I was going to talk maybe to your first question also about like why should people care about Web3 storage. I think we're sort of at like a precipice, and you could think of this in 2 different forms. So I don't know if people saw, like 2 days ago, Salesforce mentioned that they're going to now have NFTs, which is great. Glad they're diving in. I think like there is a question, if you think about it, of like, okay, so what happens if Salesforce's business model changes? Like in N number of years, they realize this was a big mistake, they want to leave. Their users may not want them to leave, but they don't want to like maintain the team that's doing whatever. Now there's a question of if they had a URL that's pointing at a specific Salesforce server, like what happens if they don't want to keep that around? And I think this is actually the important thing, where from the consumer side, decentralization can be an opportunity for protection, where it's, again, leaving you that ability to exit to say, hey, like the thing that's the reference in this NFT on Ethereum or wherever else, that doesn't have to be supported by Salesforce anymore. That could be supported by me. It could be supported by any provider. Like, I'm not locked in to Salesforce maintaining the service. Equally, I mean, one could look at this as a benefit to like these Web2 companies, where it's a benefit to them to be able to exit the service as well. If it's a bad business model for them and they don't want to offer this, then yeah, they can now put this back on the customer. They can rely on third-party services without having to like disrupt these applications. So I'd argue like verifiability actually is this enabler on both sides, both for users of like traditional services as well as these providers. I would say like sort of an addendum to that as well is because we're doing these things with cryptographic systems, the ability to pay is no longer locked into whoever has the credit card that's on this one account. Like these could be smart contracts that are the things that pay. They could be the result of like DeFi yield that are the things that pay. It could be a community of folks who over time is changing. So it could be a DAO. And I think like having the ability to have these flexible models now means that you have systems and infrastructure that could be broader. Like the Internet Archive, I actually think they work with both of us. Buddies, great people, but largely funded as a nonprofit. Brewster was like the one who seeded it with a lot of money. I think they raised money from other folks as well, like through donations. But it is interesting because it's like, it's a set of people who are all mission driven, but like it's a set of people in one specific area. Imagine if there was like a giant earthquake that like somehow hits all of California, it takes them offline. Is that data lost? And like how do we actually make a more resilient like infrastructure for humanity's information? That could be something that is just a smart contract where it's like, hey, here's a pool of funds, the same, instead of having Jimmy Wales ask for your $3 of coffee, it's like maybe you mint an NFT to show that you support like the archival of humanity's information. Those funds go into a smart contract, the smart contract funds the data. Like, I think these are ways that we can build systems that are more resilient than any one of us or any one set of people. And I think that's actually the more interesting thing. I think the reason why maybe these are not as obvious as use cases is we actually haven't had these primitives before. Even when we think about like digital objects, I always talk about NFTs not as like the JPEG version, but they're just digital bearer objects. And we've had digital objects before, but they were digital objects locked into specific servers. So like you can buy a skin from game or like from Fortnite or whatever, but that's locked inside of a game. And like when I leave this room, I'm not stripping off my clothes. I take them with me. Like we haven't had digital bearer objects before, and that's like the unique primitive that having this public infrastructure of blockchains give us. And so if we want that vision to be real, where like the internet will be filled with more and more things that are user owned, it also implies that the data itself can't be hosted on a service that is implicitly coupled to one specific company or one specific thing.
JV, I love the analogy. It's so graphic. It's still in my head.
You're welcome.
We all keep our clothes and we enter as we leave the room. But okay, this side we talk about the retail. Why should retail customers care? Can we talk about institutional adoption and why should institutions consider switching? Because the migration cost is actually very high.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah. Maybe, do you want to start or do you want me to start this one?
You got the mic, go for it.
I'll do it. Okay. So where we see that institutional adoption is really, Dr. Lee there was kind enough to say, yes, the economics, absolutely the economics, right? If someone is paying a huge amount of money to Amazon and they can lop a zero off that bill, it's very attractive. So we certainly see it starting on the economic side, but then also on the privacy, the security side of it, those are really important things as well, right? So people are looking at the large providers and saying, oh, you're mining my data. With decentralized systems, because of the way the data is stored and the strong encryption, you've got the providers, the node operators, nobody can actually mine your data. It's impossible. And it's guaranteed by math, not by security guards. And so that's a big difference in terms of knowing and having confidence that it's actually private and it's impossible to break. Now the last piece of it though, I think that ties into that whole durability story, right? So if your data's in one Amazon data center, I mean, how many people have lost their Netflix? Like end of world kind of situation because some Amazon data center went down. But if your data is distributed over thousands of nodes all over the internet, where basically the world has to end for your data to become unavailable, that's a great story. And similarly, having that content addressing lets you say it's not just durable, right? It's immutable and it's verifiably immutable, right? That's something that doesn't exist outside of Web3 today, and that's really where the innovation is. And so enterprise adoption for us is really coming through with, we lead with the economics, but then the performance of having that distributed system, the privacy, all of that leads through, and that's where we're seeing traction is just the combination of benefits packaged up in such a way that Web 2 companies can understand it, perceive the value, and then adopt.
What are some of the most commonly asked questions by an institutional client that you have to repeatedly answer? We want to hear it.
Yeah. So your joke about is my data on some rando's computer in Peoria, Illinois under a desk? And the answer is it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter to you. When you load a web page, right, do you sit there and go, I wonder what routers this bits are going through. I'm really curious about what the cables are and what data centers, all of these pieces of the web page. No, what you care about is, why are my cat photos not loading really, really, really? Okay, maybe not the cat photos, but for me it's cat photos. But yeah, I mean, that's the objections are largely around how can I trust it because it's distributed over so many places. And what you need to do is just educate them and say, look, Web3 is different. Everything is encrypted. Everything is stored in such a way that because the infrastructure isn't run by you, when you have to defend yourself against your own infrastructure, you make different design choices. And you take those design choices and you turn those into features. And so when you're securing yourself against your infrastructure, you can then allow third parties to say, hey, they can't mine it, we can't mine it, your keys are your data. And that's an important thing, that people want ownership of their data. People want their data to follow them wherever they go, and we allow them to achieve that. But yeah, it's always about are you sure it's okay that it's stored in random places? And then once you sort of walk through the benefits in the model, they see that it's not just that, it's okay that these things are stored that way, but it's actually a benefit to them. The high availability, the durability, and the performance that kick in.
Great answer.
Cool. So I would say, the big difference between Web 2 and Web 3, it's completely different use cases. And so enterprises, how they use, computation and data centers and run their businesses right now in Web 2 and how they run their traditional businesses, it's a completely different use case for what they'll want to use in Web 3. And so I don't think that decentralized compute ever gets as fast as distributed computing, because it can be very tailored for the needs of specific organizations, exactly what they're trying to do and their security and their own privacy. And it's great. It has a perfect use case for the world we live in today. But the world we live in tomorrow is this very interesting new place in Web 3, and it's kind of its own world where everything's transparent. And so I think where you see that the best way for enterprise-grade solutions currently, and I think there's future solutions that haven't been solved yet. There's going to be new innovations that happen every year, and we're all going to have our own haha moments. And I think a lot of it's going to come with DAOs and different voting on organizations and who's allowed to vote and that stuff. And getting that in another question, but with DeFi, I think it's been the first real breakthrough use case for enterprises, where all of the information lives on the blockchain. Those blockchains have to be everywhere all around the world, and that information has to be completely verifiable by all parties, whether you're in New York or in Singapore or California, and you have to know 100% that that's the right information, and everyone's kind of in a fair trading lane. You used to be able to have people like front run if they had the server close to them. If you're close to the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, and the data center was close to you, you would try to build your computers around there because you could get access to the data quicker and make decisions faster. With Web3, it's the same data everywhere, as long as you can get fast data wherever you want to be, and as long as you're working with an enterprise-grade compute solution like Ankr, other people that might do the same, but Ankr is the fastest, and so you should use Ankr if you're ever thinking of doing this. It's a completely different use case that allows you to trade faster, that allows you to, win more, to make better decisions, to have faster analysis. And this whole industry runs on a very large systems of if this then that's, bots, technology solutions written out by many different companies to make the whole thing run faster and better and in different ways than what happens in Web 2. So I think it's a completely different use case, and those innovations continue to be unlocked every year. And and that works for retail as well as enterprises.
I love how you mentioned Web 2 versus Web 3. That's exactly sort of my next question. Does that mean Ankr's use case will probably be better suited for blockchain data versus offline data that's currently stored in Snowflake? Or it's
100%.
Okay.
100%. The whole way that we're architected is to make the fastest possible access to blockchain data, to accessing it and writing toward the validators. And we do it in a way that like AWS couldn't compete with, Google Cloud can't compete with, because they're just not set up for that. And they could compete with it, but they would have to put in some years and work to get to where we're at now. And so as the industry still grows, we'll get a further advantage on all that stuff. And some of our competitors in compute use AWS and cloud, and they're not able to compete with our speed currently because of how we're set up.
That's very cool. So technically, you're not competing with the incumbent. You're in the blue ocean. You're operating your own thing in the Web3 data world. Like that. That's awesome. And that's a great segue to my next question, actually, talking about use cases. And let's go back to this side. What are the prime use cases? And you mentioned cold storage. Explain what that means. What's the best use case for people to choose Filecoin? And later we'll get to why would people choose Computecoin and Storj.
Yeah. The way to think about Filecoin today. So Filecoin today is probably, I was using this analogy with you earlier, probably closer to best describe it as being in the Roadster era of Tesla, where it's the thing that Filecoin is proving is that we can build a decentralized protocol that scales to internet capacity. Filecoin today has about 17 exabytes of storage capacity. That's 170 cerns, still verifiable on a commodity laptop. But the point is that this system actually can deliver the guarantees that we want. So you can have a consensus mechanism proving the entire network every 24 hours. You can still verify it on your own laptop. But in order to do that, we have to use some pretty complex cryptography. And as a result, it's best suited not for like the Web2 retrieval, probably closer to something like cold storage or something where the retrieval speed, you're willing to take like a couple seconds of latency. You're not waiting for your web page to load. It's like you can wait for the thing to like recover and back up or download or whatever. So I think that's probably where we see like the things that people like using Filecoin for tend to be in two very specific dimensions. Either they're trying to take advantage of the large capacity and super cheap storage. You see this with like large archival use cases. There's like 100 petabytes of data that's mostly Web2 companies that are just like backing stuff up, moving from other solutions and just trying to save money. But more importantly, and the ones that I find more interesting are the ones that are actually looking more for the verifiability properties, where especially if you have NFTs as an example, you spent, I don't know, $69 million on a Beeple. Like the thing that you actually want to know is like, is someone holding on to this data? And it's something that you can verify yourself. And so that's where like the fact that there are proofs coming in that this person still has the data, and more importantly, that there's something you can do if you don't see some amount of like these proofs coming in, becomes the more important property. Like I think actually, I don't know if you would ask this more about like, on the enterprise side, people worried about like, oh, is it stored on some rando's computer? I think one of the answers that we have in our ecosystem is you shouldn't have to trust us if you can verify. So if you can verify what's actually happening to the data, like you don't care if it's on a rando's computer because you know, well, I will one, see that they still have it, and then two, I know they will lose a lot of money if they can't prove that they have it. And three, there's something I can do in the event that that one person went offline, which is why people store multiple copies on the network. So yeah, I guess, yeah, for Filecoin, a lot of the use cases really take advantage of those two properties, whether it's the scale side or the verifiability. As Filecoin lands things like retrieval markets, which are hopefully coming later this year, then you can start building like CDNs on top of Filecoin. And so some of these higher or lower latency use cases become much more achievable, where you can say, hey, I want to distribute content and just dump money into a smart contract and have that go. That's like one that we see is like not super far away. Things like perpetual storage. I just want to auto-renew my data and have it go forever, things like that.
Yeah, so summarize, if I'm a university, I have a bunch of student data that I probably don't want to lose, I probably don't want people to tamper with, but I don't want to use to store, then I'll use Filecoin for it.
Yeah, and I think like the other thing that we sort of see is institutions that have infrastructure themselves that treat it more like a hybrid solution, where if you, again, Web3 is not about like, oh, you now are like working with a new cloud. It's like you could participate in the system yourself. You can mine your own data. You can then take advantage of the fact that there's other data centers that are using the same interfaces. So you can store with other institutions as well, get the same guarantees. So you can sort of tune between what is the stuff that you already have and then only add on the bits that you need. Or if you want, you could like wholly just move to like using decentralized storage without running anything yourself, and basically everything in between.
Very nice. Yeah, Max, what about you?
Yeah, regarding the use case, basically what I want to say is like we should target the clients from not only Web3 but also Web2, and that will be more important, especially under the current market condition. We all know how the market is going these days, right? So and we can tell that in the coming 1 or 2 years, you know, many Web3 projects they will be filtered out, okay? But a Web2 companies, they will be still there, right? So and they have a strong need. But the things like for these, so that's why we need to build an infrastructure to satisfy the needs from both Web3 and Web2. Just like we are building infrastructure for example, the cell phone, right? You can now say, oh, my infrastructure can only support 4G LTE network. If you're using a 3G phone, okay, bye-bye, sorry, I'm sorry. I cannot support you, cannot make any phone calls, right? So definitely it's not that. Basically back to the clients. So different Web2 and Web3 clients, they have different needs. So for Web3 clients, because they have a different mindset, okay? For Web3 projects and these clients, they say, okay, I care about the nature of decentralization. I want my website on a decentralized infrastructure. I want my data on a decentralized infrastructure. That's what they care. And they will ask you, can you do that? Can you do that, right? Prove me. But for Web2 clients, they may not be fan of a decentralization. You need a long time to educate them, right? And they have regulated data. They cannot do decentralization in the short term, right? So, but they care about what? They care about the bill. If you can come and build 10%, even 10%, 20%, okay, I will go for it, right? So just like we all know that Netflix pay like tens of millions of bills every month to Amazon, right? If you can say, hey, Netflix, I can cut you 10% off, okay, you got it, right? So it's a different group of Web2 and Web3 clients. They have a different mindset. They care about different things. But what we're building is like we wanna meet
Bridge
these,
the two.
Yeah, right.
Amazing.
Yeah, we see a very similar breakdown, right? With Web3, that's where innovation is happening. That's where the pace of change is really rapid, but it's also not where a lot of the data or revenue is, right? The data and revenue and use cases are largely in Web 2, and so
Right.
in
Video streaming,
exactly,
the database service, all these type of things.
all those things. But interestingly enough, in Web 3, we see sort of two things that are really important. One is really permanent storage, right? Storage that someone can say, okay, it's been cryptographically audited, it's permanent, it's there, I know it's there. And then also retrieval, right? People like retrieval speed, so they want it fast. They want the benefits of decentralization, but the performance of Web 2. And so, like for blockchain fastsync, for example, being able to move a 2 terabyte file across the internet to spin up a node really fast at 30 gigabit per second is important. But some of the other Web 2 things like security, privacy, and all that aren't as important. But when we're serving Web 2 customers in like media and entertainment, and we're storing videos, the things they want to know are cost. Is this going to shave a zero off my Amazon bill? But also, is it secure? Can I have all of the cutting edge tools in Web 3 for privacy, security, and all of that good stuff to allow me to do access management and make sure that if I store a piece of data that is private, that absolutely I can guarantee that it's cryptographically verifiable, that it isn't tampered with, and it can't be accessed. Like these are privacy and security things that are important in Web 2, but they're benefits from Web 3. Weirdly though, it's the request we get all the time is, hey, can you just store my data on nodes that are only in the US or only in the EU? And the answer is, well, yes, we can, but it's dumb and you shouldn't do it. Because anytime you sort of cut down the amount of distribution you can do and say, hey, would you like your data being supported by 14,000 nodes or 7,000 nodes, right? It's impactful, but they're like 7,000. So what are you going to do? So with the education, I think we'll get there. But at this point in time, the use cases are really focused sort of on what people care about most. And in the decentralized space, certainly, performance is probably the thing we see the most.
I think that the majority of the infrastructure space, like my colleagues have said, is also in Web 2, and we would love to see that start to transition into our industry because that's going to make all of our companies boom, and we're in great shape to take them in right now. But I'm not sure that we have the right use cases yet for all these needs that they have, And so in the current atmosphere, I'd say, at least where we're at right now, it makes more sense for Web3 companies to work with Web3 infrastructure companies because we provide a use case that's super specific for them, and we're pushing the ball forward on innovation every day, every month, with what we are able to do and things that we can do that Web2 infrastructure companies can't do. And that's why people say it's a very early industry. You'll hear people say it's still early and things like that, and you'll show people their early internet growth curve and how the user base grew over time exponentially. And it's a very similar industry to like that, and it's just it's the dawn of a new one. And so when it comes to privacy, I think that the majority of use cases for blockchain right now don't have to do with privacy. Most privacy blockchains don't make it. Most public blockchains do. Privacy networks make up, I think, less than 10% or less than 5% of our industry. The majority of stuff is a fully transparent blockchain that everyone can see and verify, and everyone knows it's safe and can't be compromised. And that's the cool thing about Web3 right now in crypto is that our industry is able to work in this fully transparent way where we all know we can trust it or it's trustless because you don't even have to think about whether or not you can trust it. And if anyone were to try to tamper with it or mess with it, they wouldn't be able to. And so there's a lot of new innovation and security that comes from that, and eventually these two industries will hit a point where they really cross over, and we're waiting for that for sure. I don't think we're fully there yet. So for enterprises, a lot of them just don't have that full use case to come into us yet, but I think it's going to come, and we don't know exactly when it's going to come, but it's for sure going to come. Everything keeps on happening in this industry just like they told us it would, and so you just got to be patient and pay attention.
Love it. Wow, timed perfectly. Now we're almost on the dot to finish this session. Thank you so much for all the panelists' time and expertise, and I hope this session is helpful for promoting more adoption of decentralized storage and really build towards an open metaverse, open internet, which is the original sort of genesis of why we want to do this in the first place.